Hello, welcome everybody. Just going to give everybody a little minute to come in. It's great to have people joining us today for this session. It always takes a little bit of time for everybody to get settled, so we will give a minute before we get started, but welcome. Hope everybody's got a nice cup of tea. It's going to be a great chat that you're going to be hearing today. Oh, well done. Yes, Vicky and Anna Amber are well equipped with their tea, so down mine too fast. All right. Well, we're 1 minute past, and I think most people seem to have found their way in, which is fantastic. So, I am so delighted to welcome everyone to this session where we're going to be exploring how some inspiring projects that we've been working on and bridging the gap have managed to get organic veg and pulses into the public sector, into school food specifically. For those who don't know me, I'm Hannah. I'm the program manager for Bridging the Gap at Sustain. And before I get started, it would be great to just take a little opportunity to remind you that, of course, we are a very diverse and inclusive community here. And please bear this in mind. We will not be tolerating any kind of discrimination, so be considerate of other people's points of view and avoid using any offensive language in our conversations today or any inappropriate cultural references. We're looking forward to having an event, as always, that is safe and people feel respected. If you have any concerns or there's anything you want to raise, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me here at Sustain. So we would really like to get a sense of who is here with us today. It's such a lovely big group. And obviously, we're going to be talking about things that affect people who are in this group. So it'd be great for you to introduce yourself in the chat and let us know if you are a grower, a supplier, a caterer, a procurer, someone working in the local authority or in the civil service, or in the third sector, or you could just be an interested person who's looking forward to hearing about school food. So do let us know, introduce yourself in the chat, let us know where you're coming from today. We are recording this session, so we will share that with you after the event. And if it would support your experience today, please do bear in mind that you can use the closed captions option at the bottom of the screen to have text displayed on your screen. Also, I'd like to remind you that today we're going to be using the Q&A box for questions. So try not to put your questions into the chat, but instead put them into the Q&A box because we will be using those to pull out the questions for our speakers. All right, I am now going to hand over, that's enough from me, and I'll hand over to Kiloran, who led on the drafting of our most recent report on public sector food procurement in Bridging the Gap. And she's going to introduce the topic of today's conversation and tell you a little bit about Bridging the Gap before we hand over to the two speakers. So over to you, Kiloran.
Thanks, Hannah. Hi, everyone. My name is Kiloran and I am the Bridging the Gap Programme Officer at Sustain. I'm going to tell you a bit about what Bridging the Gap did over the past 3 years. So Bridging the Gap is a multi-year programme led by Sustain, together with our partners, Alexandra Rose Charity, Growing Communities, Food Sense Wales, Nourish Scotland and Nourish NI. And this partnership was funded by the National Lottery with the ambition to find ways to make climate and nature-friendly food accessible to people experiencing low income. And so we set out to do this and learn by doing, and then use the learning to inform policy change. So the approach was to run pilots across the UK that would trial solutions to bridging the gap, identified by the communities themselves. And we were focusing on organic and agroecological fruit, veg, and pulses. Next slide, Hannah. So we ran 9 pilots across the 4 nations, and 3 of these pilots were in schools. And they were called Give Peas a Chance in the northeast of Scotland, Welsh Veg in Schools in Wales, and a smaller pilot in London, which was trialled in 2 primary schools in Hackney. And over the course of these pilots, we have enabled 150,000 children in schools to have access to organic fruit, veg, and pulses, 33% of whom live in low-income areas. So why did we have 3 pilots in public sector settings as part of this programme? Well, with nearly £5 billion spent on food and catering in our schools, hospitals, prisons, and care homes, the public sector has an enormous purchasing power. And we could be using this to drive a market for UK horticulture, a sector that definitely needs investment. Sustain also produced another report recently called Follow the Carrot, which found that expansion of universal free school meals could be generating 600 million in revenue for British farmers. And resilience, the word of the moment. We should be developing local food infrastructure, as our pilots have started to do, and developing demand via new markets. And this will be essential to ensure we have a resilient supply base in the UK. Now, public sector food procurement and policy are devolved matters within the United Kingdom. So Wales and Scotland has a more centralised procurement system, and Amber and Sarah will tell you a little bit more about that. In England, there's more of a mix. So there's council-run catering services, there's private catering services, and then there are still a small number of schools which still procure in-house. Universal free school meals is also slightly different across the nations. We have universal free school meals for infants in England, and in Scotland, Wales, and London, that has been taken further into the junior years. And then the figure that the cost of a school meal is set at is also different. In Wales, we have it coming in at £3.40, Scotland, £3.33, Northern Ireland, £3.10, and England at £2.61. The Mayor of London has actually topped this up to £3. As well as this, we're in a pivotal moment. So we've got general elections looming in Scotland and Wales, and we're actually delighted to see some policy calls from the programme directly referenced in manifesto commitments. There's interest and momentum growing for this work, and I'm sure Amber and Sarah will tell you more about that. In England, the Labour government committed to 50% local and or sustainable food procured into the public sector, and we're awaiting further announcements on this. And then this week, we've also seen the announcement of a new consultation on school food standards, and we're pleased to see some recommendations for increasing fibre and including pulses as a way to meet protein requirements. And yet, this has been an incredibly difficult couple of years, particularly in England, as a number of council-run catering services have been shutting due to the financial pressures. But next slide, please, Hannah. What have we learned from our work? The most important thing we've learned is that it can be done. These pilots have demonstrated that. And with the right investment and support, it is possible for public sector contracts to drive a market for this produce and give growers the confidence that they can grow for that market, and simultaneously enable governments to meet their commitments to support climate, nature, and public health. We've demonstrated what best looks like. We've got organic fruit and veg through SME supply chains together with engagement with children. And we've done this via forms of supply chain facilitation provided by our pilot leads. Next slide, please, Hannah. And we can see that this has the potential to be a significant route for market for growers. And our research shows that when you do this, you get significant returns. So you can see here the returns for climate and nature, local economies, health and well-being, and communities. And so, next slide, please, Hannah. Change won't happen if we don't fix the whole food system. So we've alighted on a suite of policy recommendations that addresses production, supply, and demand. In public sector food settings, we're calling for an investment in supply chain facilitation roles, funding and incentives for public sector food procurement frameworks that support local, sustainable, and shortened supply chains. Amending the free school meals guidance to include integration of quality assured produce, reviewing and reforming school food funding, setting ambitious environmental targets for fruit, veg, and pulses in buying standards and school food nutrition standards, requiring schools to have a food policy, and also increasing pulses on school menus. And I will now hand back to Hannah. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiloran, for that helpful introduction. So we are now going to hand over to our fantastic panelists for today. So we have Sarah Gowanlock from the Soil Association Scotland joining us, and Amber Wheeler from Welsh Veg in Schools. Just to briefly introduce Sarah. Sarah's the project manager at Give Peas a Chance, which was obviously funded by Bridging the Gap, and she's the programme manager for Food for Life Scotland at the Soil Association, which is funded by the Scottish Government. She claims to be obsessed with pulses and supply chains, and supporting environments with healthy and sustainable food as accessible and an easy choice. Sarah, it builds partnerships across Scotland's food system, and so she was very well placed to take on this work for us. I'd love to hand over to you now, Sarah, to talk us through what you found on Give Peace a Chance.
Thanks so much, Hannah and Kiloran and Sustain for having me today. It's fantastic to be speaking with you all. I've been checking the chat and all the various places that everyone's coming from. So it's really great to be on the call and to share a little bit about this project, Give Peas a Chance. So I'm going to start with a little bit about the Scottish school meals context, just to give you that, and also a little bit about kind of my background and how this all fit together. So the program that I work on is called Food for Life Scotland, and with that we work with caterers in local authorities and other public sector settings to achieve food for life served here. So we have really long-standing relationships with caterers in Scotland, and as alluded to before, in Scotland we have a system where that catering for the local authorities for the school meals is done at a central level across the 32 local authorities. So in most places, you'll be seeing, a singular menu for the primary schools within that local authority area, and it will be a catering operation from that local authority. That there are some variations across Scotland, but in general, that's the kind of catering structure that you'll see. So Give Peas a Chance is kind of integrated into that context. And this was a pilot project funded by Bridging the Gap, of course, and it was a partnership between ourselves at Soil Association Scotland, Aberdeen City Council catering and procurement teams, Royal Northern Countryside Initiative, RNCI, and RET, which is the Royal Highland Education Trust. Next slide, please, Hannah. So how did this get started? This was basically a project that was all about building a brand new supply chain to connect pupils with a sustainable source of protein, and that could be locally produced and organic, and also to kind of produce a new human consumption market potential for a product that was all of those things. So this kind of started back a couple of years ago when my colleague met farmer Phil Swire, who you can see on the slide here. He's an organic farmer. His farm, Balmacune Farm, is just the southern bit of Aberdeenshire in Lawrencekirk. And when he met my colleague, he was and still is a very passionate guy, passionate about how he can get good food into various places. And one thing that he was really passionate about was these peas that he was growing as part of his crop rotation. He, at the time, was selling this into, it was going into animal feed. It was being sold abroad, but it wasn't really going into the human consumption market. But it was a really amazing crop that he thought could do so much more. And one thing he was really passionate about as a father to young children was the possibilities of this going into school meals. This was an amazing interaction, and at the time, really passionate, but we weren't quite sure how to connect up the dots until Bridging the Gap came along. And as that opportunity presented itself, we really saw that this was something we could build in a couple of different elements into. We had really good connections with catering teams, so we could build a human consumption market for this, kind of guarantee that market and supply. And we could also, through the funding, put in place a subsidy, which would lower the price and lower the risk for both the caterers on one side and having the peas, but also for the farmer, because we didn't know what any of the supply chain would look like. At the time, we had peas in the field and we had schools way over here, and we didn't know how to connect them up. But we also thought, well, we were really only aware of these types of pulses being used in soups, maybe a couple of other recipes. So we knew there was going to be a little bit of work to do around how do we integrate something like this into the school meals effectively, and also a little bit of work around, well, how do we actually get these to be consumed? Once they're on the plate, what's the next step? So we wanted to bring in some educational elements to connect classroom learning in with what was happening in the dining hall. Next slide, please. So we set about, with the funding from Bridging the Gap, building the supply chain. So we started with the peas in Aberdeenshire, where they were grown and they were dried. Phil then made the connection with a processor, a large multinational company down in Lincolnshire, who was able to clean, dehusk, and split those peas. They then came back up to the farm where they were bagged up and then distributed by the existing fruit and veg wholesaler. And then they went out into Aberdeen City Council schools. I should also say that we kickstarted this project by having an amazing farm visit where the Aberdeen City School caterers came along, and we had a 3-course pea lunch, which is a lot of peas in each course, but it really sold the fact that these peas were viable as a product to use in the schools, and they were delicious. So with that buy-in, we were able to work with the procurement team as well, which we brought in fairly quickly to this process to build this supply chain up with them and with their links as well. So it was all about bringing lots of people around the table to talk about what would be feasible. And sometimes when you spoke to one person, they would say, oh, I think other parts of this supply chain are going to be a problem. And you go speak to that part, and all of a sudden, lots of people were really interested and wanted to be on board. So we found that to be a really effective way to build this supply chain. Next slide, please. So peas on the menu. We worked with the Aberdeen City Council catering team, which is pictured there with their lovely smiling faces. We had a recipe development day, and they came up with 12 different recipes. 11 recipes of those made it onto the menu, and you have some of the recipes there. I think another thing that we really took away from this project was the amazing creativity and just how much Aberdeen City Council caterers embraced this project. They were really proud of it, and they should have been, because of the amazing work that they did to develop these recipes, tweak these recipes, and continue to serve them in ways that would be really appealing to the children. So we actually saw uptake increasing over a 16-week period for 8 of the 11 recipes. So we saw really good, we saw that by keeping it on the menu, that was actually encouraging uptake to increase over time. Next slide, please. And we also wanted to integrate this into education. So I mentioned our education partners were RET, Royal Highland Education Trust, and Royal Northern Countryside Initiative, RNCI, and you can see Ali there. We had classroom talks, presentations, actually bringing together how does the pea grow, what are the environmental benefits, and then you can't see it in this image, but we also kind of linked that directly into menu items that were on the school menu. We had a competition for coming up with a mascot and a seed packet design. The seed packet was then used to go into windowsill garden projects, which is something that RNCI has done for well over a decade, really well integrated project. And so we integrated this into that, and it kind of expanded the reach. And then when we had those 2 winners from those 2 competitions, they went on a farm visit in June of last year in order to kind of meet Phil and go on the farm and see where the peas were actually coming from. So we tried to link it in with lots of different things. We also had resources that were made by RET, which linked into the curriculum, 7 different lesson plans, and that was downloaded 1,500 times across the course of the project. So really trying to integrate this project into education in different ways, connecting in with head teachers' networks to try to share the project really effectively. And again, it was about who you brought around the table. So we had a really amazing connection with the council in order to make that happen. Next slide, please. And so here are some of the numbers from our work with Aberdeen City Council. We had the 60 schools, 173,000 pea dishes served with the 11 recipes. We did a local multiplier effect calculation of £1.66 recirculated for every £1 spent. And we reached just over 11,500 people through the education activities and 3 tons of peas being purchased. Next slide, please. And in terms of the learnings and the legacy of this project, so we started this project, the peas started being served in Aberdeen in April of 2024. They're still on the menu today. They have some new recipes when their new menu was brought in last October. And these were things like a pea and wild venison pie. So they're still innovating, still interested. And we have also seen that they've come off of that subsidy because we were able to put that in place and de-risk it from the start. We were then able, Phil was able to kind of work out how that price would work going forward and make that something that worked for both him and the council. So that was really positive to see. We also were able to expand this work into the Highland Council and Murray Council, and they were able to pick up some of those recipes and adapt them for their own services. And they've also had a number of education activities. So overall, I think we had about 67,000 pupils who were able to access these pea dishes over the course of this project. In terms of resources, they're still there, available for anyone to download and to interact with. We've got all the recipes that were made as part of this project, which are also interacting with the school meal regulations in Scotland. Which I guess is another part of the school meals in Scotland to be aware of, is that ours are legislative. You have to follow those regulations. So our recipes do follow all of that. And then finally, I mentioned the supply chain and building the supply chain. We did realize that was quite fragile in certain ways. One of the issues mainly being processing and the challenges around processing not being in Scotland. So we've done some research around this. We had a pre-feasibility study that was published just last month. We ran stakeholder workshops and webinars to try to understand and map the supply chain really well. And then the researchers there also have put forward some ideas for how that supply chain could be strengthened and what policy ideas could strengthen that further as well. So I think we might be sharing some of those in the chat so that people can access that. But that's where we are at the moment, and really interested to dive into the world of pulses. I am actually obsessed with pulses, Hannah. It is indeed definitely part of me now, and really interested in how we can support those supply chains going forward. And it's just been brilliant to be a part of the Bridging the Gap program. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And yeah, thank you for so clearly highlighting that value of the facilitation role that you were providing there, in terms of making sure that all those connections were linked up, and this holistic approach to the resources that were found their way into the schools alongside the pulses themselves. We will dig into this more, but please do put your questions for Sarah into the chat while we move on to hear from Amber. So Amber has worked on food systems change both on the ground and as a researcher for over 20 years. Her main area of expertise is how to enable Wales and the UK to produce and consume more fruit and vegetables, particularly the role of small scale and short supply chains in that. And she's currently freelance working with Food Sense Wales, coordinating and doing action research on Welsh veg in schools. So over to you, Amber.
Thanks very much, Hannah. Great to be here. Great to see so many people here from all walks of life across the UK. And I, like Sarah, is obsessed with peas. I am just Dr. Veg. I am like so obsessed with veg. It's unbelievable. But I'm here to talk to you about Welsh Veg in Schools and our journey, and share some insights and hopefully give some inspiration from the work we've been doing. Welsh Veg in Schools involves a lot of partners, and we have Food Sense Wales and Lantra and wholesalers, and great funding, and thanks very much to Bridging the Gap in the past and from Welsh Government too. But if you go on to the next slide, Hannah, I'm going to go through the slides pretty quickly, so just so you know, you get busy with your finger. So basically, Welsh Veg in Schools is a movement of stakeholders trying to increase organic horticulture for the benefit of everyone. It's really building relationships across that whole supply chain. It's not one organization, it really is involving everybody in order to create change, and it's one of the key aspects, and I'll come to that a bit further on. Next slide. I wanted to get a little bit of context here, and I'm sorry this is a little bit fuzzy. It wasn't fuzzy on my slide, but it is for you slightly, but you get the picture. The land area to veg in the UK has been going down, and that also was reflected in the area of production. And of course, then we are more reliant on veg coming in. And we all know the resilience, the buzzword, but it's not a particularly resilient system when you have so much veg coming in from abroad in climate and political vulnerable times. So that's the context we all know probably, but if you move on to the next slide. For Wales specifically, we have only 0.1% of the land growing fruit and veg, which produces around a quarter of a portion per head of population. So we are particularly an importer of vegetables, which again, in terms of resilience, isn't great. And that context really set the where the work has gone. We know that in 2020 there were only about 200 growers, and now we have about 500 growers in Wales, which isn't a huge number, but it is expanding. And we'd only need about 2% of the land to grow 5 a day for the whole population. So you still have 98% of farmland doing other stuff. So that's the sort of context, also the sort of food poverty aspects. So if you go on to the next slide. We started in 2022 with just a frustration that food procurement, surely we can get some veg into schools. Surely it can't be that hard. A little bit like Sarah and the conversation up with the farmer. Surely we can do this. So a few people got together, Food Sense Wales, Castell Howell, who's a wholesaler, Cardiff Council, and a grower, and got a ton of courgettes into Cardiff schools over the summer. And that really proved that it could be done, and really got us thinking about next steps. And that really, the possibility of that and the commitment from involved partners has led on to us scaling dramatically over the last few years. Next slide, please. So just to give you an idea of who's involved, and again, sorry, this is a bit fuzzy. At the core, growers are the main focus, because in the past they have suffered with the supply chain. So we've found that focusing on the growers' needs as a centre really helps our work and is absolutely integral. Around the growers, we have the wholesalers who get the product into the local authorities and the local authorities themselves. We have food partnerships who work on the activities going into schools and communities. We have Food Sense Wales who works on more the convening aspect, that policy advocacy, communications, research, etc. And then Farming Connect, who's actually Lantra now, because this is things have changed slightly. Lantra, who help with growers and training and that sort of thing. Next slide. So in terms of that scaling I was talking about, the colours are different on this. This is pretty from what I find. So if we look at the red line, that's the number of local authorities involved. In 2022, we had 1 local authority involved. In 2026, we now have 16. Growers, we've gone from 1 grower to now 20 growers. And then the tons is interesting. That is going up greater than our number of growers, because some of our growers are expanding. So some are increasing their levels of production. So although our growers are going up quite high, actually so having some growers who are scaling up within that cohort is quite useful too. Next slide. So this year we have cropped planned for 20 growers to supply in over 100,000 units of veg and apples, going in through 5 wholesalers into 16 local authorities. We, subject to crops, climate change and everything going well, that should be what's achieved. We may have another couple of local authorities coming on board. And just to return to your point about how it works in Wales and context, we also have mainly council run catering. In 20 out of 22 of our local authorities, the councils organise the procurement, and in 2 of our local authorities it's privately. So that's how we manage, because the wholesalers then are contracted in to supply into the local authority, and we then work with the wholesalers who are contracted into the local authorities. Next slide, please. So in terms of estimated sales to growers since 2022, 2024, we've seen a massive increase, and this year we're projecting that farmers' sales to us through Welsh Regin schools, well, not to us, to the schools through the wholesalers, will be around £200,000. So on the scale of things, it's not massive, but that the trajectory is there, and it is a really good solid income for the growers that they know that is coming in, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Next slide, please. So for the growers, Welsh Regin Schools has provided a platform for collaboration. It's guaranteed an income. We've been pretty flexible. We don't do contracts, but we ask for growers to crop plan with us. And if we will buy anything that's in the crop plan, if they overproduce from that crop plan, we will negotiate and say if we can buy it or not, if there's budget. We provided small grants, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit, and given publicity in terms of the overall program. We ask everybody to be organically certified or go through the certification process. So you don't have to be certified to supply in, but you have to commit to the process. We've also designed a sort of safety standard, which we call the small grower supplier standard, and that's really important in terms of health and safety, and the wholesalers then feeling reassured that they have a safe supply chain. And yeah, so we do these crop plans every year, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Next slide, please. So this is the process. In the autumn, we ask the wholesalers to estimate their fruit and veg needs for their contracted local authority schools. So this is very important because you need to be moving people onto this more seasonal approach. In the winter, we use the data from the wholesalers to create a crop plan with our Welsh growers, and we set a price. And I'll talk a little bit more about the price on a different slide. So each wholesaler has a crop plan with their own growers that's then put into place and then is agreed. Then in the spring, the growers plant the seeds, etc., etc., and in the following summer, autumn, that produce goes in. So at the moment, it's quite exciting to see there's some stuff going into the ground, and growers, basically, we don't hear from many growers at this because they're so busy out in the field. Next slide, please. This is, if you like spreadsheets, this is not a very good version of one, but spreadsheets are an essential tool, and they are, I won't go into it, but I have examples. If anybody wants to do crop planning, we can give you a pro forma for a crop planning thing that we use. If you go on. So in terms of our pricing, this is the way we do it. The growers receive a price based on the organic wholesale price of the previous year, and that is guaranteed for the year ahead. The local authority pays their contracted price to the wholesaler, and the Welsh Regin Schools makes up the difference. And we're calling that now, not the gap, sorry, bridging the gap, but now we're calling it the nature friendly uplift. We've got a new bit of funding, and they suggested that nature friendly uplift was a nice term for that difference. And now we are experimenting this year with paying that nature friendly uplift in advance of the season. So it's about 30 to 40% of the price, of the final price of the veg, that the growers get during this time, when it's an absolutely integral time for planting, buying seeds, compost, and it's a time when growers do not have an income coming in general from produce, or as much of an income. So we're investigating that, and we've been lucky enough to get some funding from Bridging the Gap to do a little bit more of an economics piece on all of this, the money side of wholesale, and whether that works. So next slide, please. Another key area has been investing in infrastructure, because we are building up a supply chain that hasn't been working for quite some time. So there has been a lot of money going into infrastructure. Our wholesaler has put money in for small grants. Welsh Government have put money in for small grants via Welsh Regin Schools. So things, bits of equipment, small bits like irrigation, polytunnels, refrigeration units, those sorts of things. Welsh Government have also put into place an infrastructure grant scheme, not just for horticulture, but for other farming as well. And growers can get up to 40% of the cost, that has been hugely helpful, and a lot of our growers have applied for that. And then there have been 4 machinery rings set up specifically for horticulture across Wales as part of the food partnerships. So on the left there, you can see a steerage hoe that was being demonstrated this week that has been purchased to share across in Ceredigion in part of West Wales. And you can see the sort of equipment then that's going to be shared between and what difference it is going to make to scaling. On the right is a carrot washer close up, so you can't quite see it, but washing facility is really important as well. A few more slides and then we're done. Really important has been the work with local authorities and catering staff. It's not always easy to receive different things in through from your wholesaler. So you're talking about catering staff who are under very pressured situations. They don't always want caterpillars in their broccoli. Some of them don't mind so much, but they're happy to get to pick them out. It doesn't always happen, but it does sometimes. Also, the product looks quite different. So an organic lettuce looks very different from an iceberg lettuce you would receive in a packet. So there are challenges, and engaging with local authority and catering staff is really key. And we're going to do a lot more work on that this year. We found that local authorities are very keen for local. They just want an easy way of it happening. And if we are making it easy for them, and if we can do that as much as we can, then it makes their work, it makes getting local easy for them. Next. Really important is working with children, like Sarah's work. You had an education element right from the beginning. I wish we'd had the money to do that. For us, we could do with a little bit more work on the education piece. We rely on ad hoc activities and giving information, and what we have found is where there is that extra information and activities and farm visits, it really enhances uptake. So we have apples like the ones to the right starting to go into, so that they're not the sort of perfect shiny apple that you would get. They're Welsh organic apples. They look slightly different. This year we're developing an apple resource with a Welsh historian called Cadwyn Graves, who's really into apples, and he's going to do a resource for schools that we're going to go in the autumn at the same time as the apple. So it's these sorts of things you need to do alongside. Next slide, please. So this year we should be supplying into around 600 schools, and again that upward trajectory, and so we're on the up. There's around 2,000 primary schools in Wales, so we're not to all of them yet, but we have a vision. And if you go on to the next slide, this is our vision. No, this is actually to compare. This is the land area to veg in Wales. So all of this work, and alongside other stakeholders doing other work in Wales, has shown that there is a change in our land area to veg in Wales that is going against the trend across the UK, which is actually quite a hard trend to go against when you're within it. So even though our area is much smaller, we are on the up in terms of land area to veg. Nearly done. So this is our vision, that 25% of all veg going into schools is local organic by 2030. And we think, next slide, that this is going to achieve a lot of things, lots of jobs, lots of more hectares of organic veg, 35% increase in bird life and fields, 226 tonnes carbon dioxide saving, and a reduced reliance on imports from countries at risk of water scarcity and the final slide. Oh, no, I've got to just, oh, okay, sorry. Some advice and about how to make this work. Start small, get the right people in the room, make sure everyone's agreed that sharing risk across the supply chain is key. Align planning timelines to growing season, grow what procurers want to buy, and research and evaluate as you go through. Next, please. If you want to find out more, there are three very good reports. I'm saying this because I wrote them. No, it wasn't just me, it was a few people. There's a summary that on the left, there's full report and the story on the right, and they're all on the Food Sense Wales website. The story gives you the more nuance, and it's worth diving in to those more nuanced bits. Finally, I just want to say that we've got elections coming up, as Kiloran mentioned, and the final slide shows that Plaid Cymru has adopted this in its manifesto. It came out last week and we were all like, wow, that's amazing. Target and incentivise a progressive increase in horticultural production with the ambition that 25% of vegetables served in Welsh schools will be of Welsh origin by 2030. So that is taken directly. They may have dropped the organic, but there may be some hope for us if politics changes in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amber. Sorry, just trying to unmute myself. Thank you so much, Amber. That's fantastic insight into the Welsh Virgin Schools programme. We've had some great questions coming in. Thank you, everybody, so much. Sorry, I've managed to exit without and not stop sharing. Now is opportunity for us to go through some of the fantastic questions that we've been receiving. Keep them coming. I have got a couple, one around sort of barriers to local authority engagement and one around how young people feel about that have kind of come across through a number of different questions. So maybe we could start with the young people first. So we've had a few questions come in around how the young people feel about the food, what it was done. I know, Sarah, you talked a little bit about the engagement that you did, as did you, Amber, and that those meals were popular. There was a specific question around uptake of school meals as a result, and also on food waste, of whether any of that was tracked. So it'd be great to hear from both of you around those kind of engagement pieces. Maybe start with Sarah.
Yeah, so in terms of the young people engagement, it was mostly through that education piece and our education partners who were able to deliver the classroom talks. I know there was a question in there around cooking opportunities. As part of that classroom talk, there was some tasting and some kind of food education elements within that, to try to get the kids kind of over maybe that initial barrier of actually trying and tasting the peas. And there were some recipes that were kind of simple recipes that were part of the resource pack as well, so that those could be picked up by teachers. But it wasn't something that we kind of brought into the classroom talk, because that would kind of just bring too many elements into it. In terms of the uptake, as I shared, we did collect some uptake figures across a 16-week period, but we weren't able to kind of draw wider associations around whether uptake was increased overall in that period, if that makes sense. But we did get anecdotal evidence from the surveys that we ran with the caterers around how the parents were kind of aware of the project. So there was one caterer who, for example, brought to a parents' evening the materials around this project and shared that, and they were kind of, the parents were saying, "Oh yes, we've heard about this." So there was indeed that kind of the kind of fabled, I guess, almost connection between what's happening in schools actually had made it to the home and then made it back into the school. So that was really good to hear. And then we also had some instances of teachers reaching out and wanting to do lessons around working directly with the school caterers to try to bring those peas into a cooking class too. So we did see those, and I guess it's about how much could we facilitate in the project and how much was able to actually be facilitated by working through the networks that we had connected in through the project. So that facilitation element again.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. How about you, Amber, in Wales?
We didn't measure plate waste specifically, but we did do some investigating of sort of a deep dive into a few schools and how it went in terms of how the veg went down. And what happened was, in the schools where there was a lot of engagement, like Sarah had with the peas, there was greater uptake. Where there was less engagement, when they didn't know that it was Welsh veg and they didn't have an idea of the story, then the uptake wasn't as good. And then there was a school where there was a lot of menu change around seasonal produce. So where you find very quick menu change, you see a decrease. Well, it was seen in this instance, a decrease in intake. So that's where you say suddenly put kale on, or a new recipe that the children aren't used to. So what we've learned, and we've known this for some time, is that you work with the vegetables that are already on the menu, and you gradually change and work with caterers. Coming in with whole menu change very quickly puts people off.
Yeah,
I guess, can I just add to that, Hannah, as well, just to reiterate what you said, Amber, and just to mention the chalk pea brownie and chalk pea cookie and brownie or muffin, depending on which local authority you're in, was definitely something that really animated a lot of people around the project, and they were really excited to see that you could use peas in this context. And yeah, it does come from sometimes working with both elements of hiding the veg in some way, or kind of I guess a bit of a Trojan horse of the brownie. They knew that there were peas in them, but that, kind of seeing it in a different context, but in a very familiar place as well, was a way to kind of overcome those barriers too.
Yeah, fantastic. So yeah, the real lessons there in terms of the engagement with the young people around the food that they're eating. I know there's some lovely stories from Wales about young people finding out about it and demanding that they have Welsh veg in their meals as well, which is lovely. Um, and then yeah, gradual introduction of changes like this. So moving on to the local authorities question. So people were interested in what barriers there were to local authority engagement. Amber, you mentioned that they were keen for local, and so that was a good entry point. Maybe we could start with that, and then talk us through any kind of barriers and how you overcame them with local authority engagement.
Yeah, many. I mean, some of our local authorities now have for local produce to be in in their contract with their wholesalers, that they've started to put it in as a line. So the wholesalers are then wanting to be involved because they've got a line in their contract saying that they should be sourcing local authorities. So we have some local authorities who are very active that way, and others who are a little bit more shy, and not shy, or just new to it and don't quite know how to get involved. It's been about building relationships, having discussions, showing that it's possible through their usual contracted wholesaler. I think that's been one of the easiest ways to do it, is where we're not working with a contracted wholesaler. It's been more tricky for that local authority to be involved, but then we start working with that wholesaler, and then if it can just be a like for like substitute for the organic, for the conventional, then that works really, really well. And if they don't have to think about it very much because they have so much to do as it is, then that works quite well. We also do engagement events with local authorities, like the Local Authority Catering Association. We'll go and talk and build relationships that way. It's really, really important that they know Welsh, that they know us and we know them, sort of thing.
Yeah, great. Sarah, I know you've done a lot of work on this over a long period as well.
Sorry, can you just remind me of the question there? I got lost my train of thought with Amber answering there.
Yeah, it was about barriers to local authority engagement.
Yeah.
I think there's been an interesting question, for example, that's come up like more recently in the chat around somebody who's tried to work with their procurement team in their local area, and there was a real lack of interest in pulses. So how did you get people as excited as you are about pulses, Sarah?
Maybe it's contagious, but so working with local authorities in Scotland, at least, I mean, I absolutely have to echo what Amber has said around how stretched the catering teams are. I mean, it really is a tough job. There's so many elements to it. There's so many things that from all angles wants to achieve through that catering provision. So they're trying to answer to a lot of different policy outcomes, while also get the food on the plates every day, and the logistics of that. So I think just coming from a place of recognizing that at the start is a really good place. With the connections that we had through the Food for Life Scotland program, is where we were able to kind of make those connections with caterers. And I would say I'd go back to that farm visit that we had, that actually being able to show people what what's at stake perhaps, or what the benefits are, really having time with people, which I know is really hard, but having that opportunity to show them on farm, this is the area that you're actually going to be supporting by having this project. These are the people that you're actually going to be supporting by being involved in this project. And then also being able to taste it and being able to see that it's actually going to be really work for them. I'd also say local authorities there's so many different elements to them. So we were really fortunate in that the people who were involved in this project were all really well linked up and connected, and knew who else within the local authority would be really valuable to bring into conversations early on. And there were still people who I wish we had brought into conversations even earlier, who were involved in that project. And that was some of our learnings as well. Even though I feel like we got a lot of it right, there were still folks who I think we could have brought into those conversations and benefited from being there. So I think it's about connecting, being able to connect within that local authority with the people who are going to support the project. And then I guess in terms of connecting directly with procurement teams, we were just very fortunate in terms of the links and the connections there. I know it's not always the same, but being able to come prepared with, these are the benefits that this is going to achieve, and make it easy for people to say yes as well, is really useful.
Yeah, fantastic. That all makes sense. And yes, it's all about how you engage, and understanding who you need to be engaging with. I think while we're with you, Sarah, there's been another sort of more technical questions around like the peas and what next for peas. Would you want to bring on more growers? What about a diversity of different peas? Those kinds of questions, and expanding, people clamoring for an expansion into England. But I think you kind of probably want to conquer Scotland first. But yeah, tell us more about that.
Of course. So the main barrier to scaling up at the moment is the processing side of things, and just trying to make sure that's actually really stable before we move forward. Farmer Phil has lots of peas, and so we feel there's lots of opportunity for these peas to be served. And I do think there's more opportunities for other growers as well, but it's about getting that processing right. So hopefully I'll put a link into the chat with the report that we had commissioned around the pre-feasibility, because that kind of draws in what are the different options for processing. We could have a large scale processor, or we could have more small scale processing that's maybe more on farm, maybe collaborative process with farmers. And there's a lot of different concerns in terms of how that processing actually looks, who owns it, what's the governance around it. And so there's lots to be worked out. And I think across the board, what we need to think about is the supply chain as one thing. So as something that can move together. So thinking about the human consumption side, what's required in order to get the throughput we need to get processing units actually profitable. Once we get back to that, what's the human consumption? How can we meet that with the public sector market, but also with other markets? How is animal feed going to have to come in the mix in order to get that throughput? Are there opportunities with retailers and processing and further processing that could support, again, the throughput that is needed? And on the other side of that, what do we need around growing? Are there further things we need to work out on that side? So kind of seeing this as one continuous thing that needs to be pushed forward together. Actually, the amount for a processor, it's not that huge if you're looking at more small scale stuff. But once you do that, then what's the next thing you have to think about? So thinking about that as a systems approach.
Yeah, absolutely. I know this is also something that Welsh Virgin Schools faced in terms of infrastructure. Amber, would you just like to briefly touch on that? And also then moving on to a few questions around the small growers standard. People were quite interested in how that was developed and what it entailed. So if you could kind of cover off those two things together, that would be great.
Sorry, I didn't quite get the question on infrastructure, but I can talk a little bit about the infrastructure. I was just answering one of the questions in the chat. So the infrastructure, we didn't need any extra infrastructure on to do the logistics because we used the wholesale setup. So the wholesalers already had cold storage, they already had vans on the road and trucks. So we really didn't need any of that sort of logistics infrastructure, which is a beauty of that mechanism. What we did have to do, and we have put some of the money, some small grants gone into sort of refrigeration units on farm, so that a farmer can put the stuff straight into cold storage and it can be picked up from the cold storage. That it really helps, and it's not hugely costly. It's like somebody can get the back of a lorry box and convert it for £1,000 to £2,000 in a second-hand situation. If you want something a bit newer, it's about £7,000. You know, it's not huge amounts of money in order to enable supply. In terms of the small suppliers standard, it is available. If you look in our reports, there is a bit of a link to what's in it, but it was and you can also, if you contact Lantra, they do, provide a summary. But it's basically in the reports. You can get a summary from there. But it really looks at those safety aspects. The watering that you do. You wouldn't water from a well that hadn't been tested onto lettuce, which is going to not be cooked going in. It's those sorts of things. Really important stuff. Don't have hazelnuts are just right next to lettuces that are going to then go into schools. These sorts of things in terms of allergens. Is that enough? No.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I do recommend having a proper look into that on the website, and resources are being shared in the chat, so please do dig into them. We have got so many fantastic questions that have been coming up, and I'm sorry that we don't have time to answer everything today, just the nature of it, but we have been copying them all down, and we will follow up with ones that we haven't been able to tackle. I'd really like to give, in the last 4 minutes, give Sarah and Amber an opportunity to kind of reflect on what they're taking away from today and what the future looks like. And maybe within that answer, some of the questions that have been coming up a little bit about, like, well, obviously, when we're looking at scaling, there is this challenge around how is it financed, and like we kind of can't shy away from that, which has been coming up in the chat a little bit. So if you feel in a position to respond on that as well while you're talking about what's next, that would be great. Sarah, let's start with you.
I mean, I always learn something when I see Welsh Veg in schools. It's an absolutely amazing pilot and program, and I'm just inspired to see how you've grown over the years. And you know that I'm also a huge fan of your crop rotation models. So I absolutely love seeing that. And I think what I'm taking away from this conversation is really that what you just mentioned there, Hannah, around scaling and the challenges of that, and how we build that into what we design in our pilots for. I've certainly learned a lot through this process, and that's definitely an element that I think, I think we've succeeded a lot in terms of looking at this in other local authorities and seeing where that can go, and also identifying the key barrier. But I think there's more that we can do on how we design our pilots for them to think about scaling up in future. So that's what I'm kind of taking away from today. And just thinking about the infrastructure that you had there, and Amber, in your slides around, carrot washing and things like that. How do we integrate our infrastructure financing into different models that spread that risk? So yeah, that's what I'm taking away.
Brilliant. Do you want me to carry straight on, Hannah? I always get so much there out of the quality of your work in terms of that, bringing it all together in one thing, in terms of the education and the supply chain. And we've scaled, but it's hard to do all of that at the same time. It's hard to, so it's keeping that quality as you go through, isn't it? Which is the challenge. I wanted to answer to the finance piece a little bit. Remember that 75-ish% of the cost of a school meal isn't spent on the ingredients. It's spent on all the other stuff, on the labor, on the electricity. It's only 25% of the cost, which is on the ingredients. And when you break that down, it's not a huge amount. And actually putting the organic in doesn't increase it a huge amount. In our last report, we said 3.3 pence per meal. It's not a huge amount of money. And we are, as I mentioned, doing a bit of a deep dive into those costs, because sometimes the wholesale organic price isn't really different from the conventional price that a local authority is paying. I can say for sure that our apples, the organic apples going in, are about the same price as the local authorities are already paying. So there are some things where they are comparable and there are win-wins, and there are some other things which for us, carrots, broccoli particularly, are twice the price that local authorities would normally pay, because we do not have big fields, we do not have the infrastructure, we do not have the kit that has been used in conventional systems on the East Coast, for instance, for a long time. So we have to invest in that, and our prices reflect that. So I have great hope for the future. We are going to continue to innovate, but we always have to be on our toes and keep our relationships good and work on them. And so all of you on this call is build relationships, start somewhere, and it is possible. And yeah, it's good work. It's good fun.
Yeah, it's good fun. It's tiring, but it's good fun. um, Thank you so much to Amber and to Sarah and to Kiloran as well, who set this all up and wrote a fantastic report summarizing everything that we've learned as well. All of this information is on our website. We will be sharing links around in a follow-up email, along with links to the other resources that our panelists have also shared. Thank you all for attending, and stay in touch. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Just while people are leaving, panelists, we've got a debrief over on Teams. I think Vicky set one up. I'm going to end the meeting. See you later.
Bye bye.